Picture this. It's 1894, and a dispute in a single-company town near Chicago just explodes. It sparks a nationwide conflict that shuts down the country's railroads and forces this epic showdown between labor, big business, and the President of the United States himself. So yeah, let's dive into what made the Pullman Strike such a pivotal moment in American history.
It really all comes down to this one question. How did one local fight in one town spiral into something that brought America to its knees? This wasn't just any strike. It was a conflict that truly tested the fabric of the nation and honestly changed the American labor movement forever. So, how do we get there?
To really get the Pullman Strike, you have to understand the era it was born in. The late 19th century, well, it was a volatile time. It was a true powder keg just sitting there waiting for a spark.
And Mark Twain just absolutely nailed it when he called this the Gilded Age. Because on the surface, you had all this incredible innovation, explosive economic growth, and these massive fortunes being built. But you scratch just beneath that thin layer of gold, and you find widespread poverty, corruption, and just deep, deep social inequality.
By 1894, things were getting critical. The whole country was in the grip of a huge economic depression they called the Panic of 1893. And we're not talking about a minor downturn here. This was a full-blown crisis that basically exposed all the fractures in American society.
And this number, wow, this really shows you the human cost. Just imagine the national unemployment rate skyrocketing from a pretty normal 3% to almost 19% in a single year. You've got millions of people out of work, and tensions all across the country are at an absolute boiling point. This was the world that this small town in Illinois was about to set on fire.
And that brings us to the town of Pullman, Illinois. Now, this place was designed to be this perfect model industrial community. But for the people who actually lived and worked there, it was fast becoming a trap.
Okay, this chart shows you the core problem so clearly. The owner, George Pullman, he sees the economic panic and he slashes worker wages by 25, even 30%. But, and this is the real kicker, he refused to lower the high rents he charged for company housing, or the prices at the company's stores. The workers were just getting squeezed from both ends.
So the list of grievances just kept piling up. It was the wage cuts, for sure. It was the high rents. But it was also this feeling of oppressive control the company had over every single part of their lives. They had no voice in how their own town was run. A federal commission later investigated and actually called this system un-American.
So, the workers tried to be reasonable. They formed a committee just to talk, to present their case. But George Pullman, he wouldn't even meet with them. And not only that, he fired the leaders of the committee. Well, that was the last straw. On May 11th, 1894, the Pullman workers walked off the job.
But this wasn't just about one factory anymore. This local strike was about to go national, and it escalated in a way that I don't think anybody could have predicted.
I mean, just look at how fast this all moved. The local strike starts in May. Just a little over a month later, the powerful American Railway Union steps in, and then, on Independence Day of all days, the U.S. Army is on the streets of Chicago. This thing had become a full-blown national crisis.
The sheer scale of this is just staggering. At its height, 250,000 workers in 27 different states had joined the boycott. They brought the nation's rail traffic, especially everything west of Chicago, to a grinding halt. And the strategy, led by the president of the American Railway Union, a guy named Eugene V. Debs, was actually pretty simple, but it was incredibly effective. Union members would not work on any train anywhere in the country if it had a Pullman sleeping car attached to it. And this act of solidarity basically paralyzed the system. And that paralysis forced the hand of the man in the White House. With the country's economy at a standstill, President Grover Cleveland decided he had to intervene. And his actions? Well, they would prove to be decisive and deadly. The government strategy here was cold and methodical. First, they needed a reason to get involved, so they claimed the strike was illegally stopping the U.S. mail. That was their legal hook. Second, they got a federal court to issue this massive injunction that basically made the entire strike illegal. Third, when the union refused to back down, Cleveland sent in 12,000 troops to enforce the order. And finally, they arrested Debs and the other union leaders for disobeying the court. Game over. Now, this was hugely controversial. The governor of Illinois, John Peter Altgeld, was absolutely furious. He argued that the president had no constitutional right to send federal troops into his state without him asking for them, and he warned that their presence would only provoke violence.
And tragically, Governor Altgeld was right. The arrival of the troops was the spark that finally lit that powder keg. Riots erupted, property was destroyed, and in the end, more than 30 people were killed. And the vast majority of those deaths happened after the federal troops arrived.
So the strike was crushed, but its end was really just the beginning of its long, complicated legacy, a legacy that reshaped America in ways we can still feel today.
So let's just break down these consequences. On the one hand, the strike set this powerful and, for unions, terrifying precedent for using the courts and the military to shut down strikes. But it also led to the end of Pullman's company town model, it turned the strike's leader into a radical socialist, and, in one of history's great plot twists, it gave America a brand new federal holiday.
You just can't make this up. This is one of the most stunning ironies in all of American history. Just 6 days, after using the full force of the federal government to crush one of the biggest labor actions the country had ever seen, President Cleveland signed a law creating Labor Day. It was, pretty transparently, an attempt to make peace with a furious labor movement.
And the strike didn't just create a holiday, it created a political icon. Eugene V. Debs was sentenced to 6 months in prison for defying that court order. And while he was there, he read socialist literature and came out a completely changed man. He would go on to run for president 5 times as the Socialist Party candidate, and he fundamentally altered the political conversation in America for decades.
So in the end, what was the Pullman Strike? Was it a necessary victory for law and order that kept the country from falling into total chaos? Or was it a brutal tragedy for American workers, where the full power of the state was used to crush their rights? You know, the answer, even all these years later, really depends on who you ask.